Thank you, Russell. Your music is beautiful and so inspiring. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so good to look out at your faces and to realize that I'm once again with my community. I know the sense of community is so strong within this congregation. Last Sunday, many of us attended the service for Jane West's husband, Stan Mayer, who passed away at home after struggling mightily. And it gave me a feeling of wonderful peace to attend his service. Jane honored his cultural traditions. He was of a Jewish faith, and his parents had been Holocaust survivors. And as I sat in the service with its traditional Hebrew prayers, and I thought of the decades, no, hundreds of years, that those prayers had sustained this people through so much suffering and so much persecution. And I felt connected, our interconnectedness. It was a wonderful feeling. And Jane told me later we went to Shiva at her house, where people come to share stories, to share traditional prayers together. They sit Shiva for 3 days, and I loved seeing the traditions and the rituals, for I knew that they were truly of comfort. I think sometimes life gets difficult. We have moments of intense happiness and gratitude, but we listen to the news, and these are tumultuous times. I mean, daily we hear reports of war, devastation, and refugees who are fleeing terrible situations. And sometimes, without wanting to or meaning to, we get caught up in the feelings of fear or rage or helplessness, and the feeling that the world is threatened by malevolent forces. I was cooking dinner the other night, and in the background I had an old movie playing on television, and it was Gandhi. I'm sure many of you saw that movie, the story of Gandhi's life, his struggle to peacefully obtain independence from India. And it was a beautifully done movie, but what struck me were the final lines of it, a quote of his that I've always loved. Remember that all throughout history, there have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time, they seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Always. So in these challenging times, it's crucial that we remain peaceful with our peaceful center. We have to train ourselves to go to a higher consciousness when some feelings of helplessness at the world's conditions sweep over us. And we have to hold our center. Envision our planet as a place of peace. You know, our founders, Charles and Merle Fillmore, lived through tumultuous times. I don't think there's been a time in history that we haven't seen tumultuous times in places in the world. And we have to know that perspective, that always, some of the tyrants seem invincible, but they always fall. Always. We have to see beyond appearances, that there is a truer reality than the daily events that are in our news and headlines. You know, the Fillmores have always been inspirational to me because I've always appreciated their emphasis on individual learning and growth, and they created a teaching that went beyond dogma. They felt we had a responsibility to walk our own path in learning. Sometimes It's so easy to give up our power to a teacher or to a minister or those we encounter who seem wiser than we and have all the answers. And sometimes exposure to a great teacher or leader can be an important part of our journey. I'm not minimizing that, but for our individual faith to mature, we need to always weigh what others tell us or what we read or what we hear against our experience of the truth. We need to honor ourselves to rely on our own learning, our own experiences, more than the experience of others. Some of you might have been raised Catholic, and there's a period during the growth of youth where they learn catechism. And they're given a sheet, and they're given questions, and they're given the answers, and part of their passing catechism is just no verbatim the answers. But you know, I don't think that it's a correct assumption that faith deepens the more we're taught about what to believe. I always liked the Buddhism philosophy because it was felt that only if we question what we're told, as we try out teachings by putting them into practice to see if they work and if they really make a difference in our lives. And this is one of the reasons I was drawn to Unity, because I saw people put the principles in, learn to the test of using them in their daily lives, using them through crisis they had experienced. And I could see them changed. I was changed. I hadn't ever found a spiritual home that I was comfortable with in the traditional churches I had attended in my younger life. And I just actually gave up on attending church because somehow it didn't connect with the life that I saw around me and the life that I lived and the challenges that I experienced. The Buddhists believe, well, the Buddha himself, he said, don't believe anything just because I say it or just because an elder you respect says it. Put it in practice. See if it's true. So I really like the fact that Merle and Charles Fillmore called their movement practical Christianity. They felt that everything they taught could be put into practice. They understood that to deepen our faith, we have to try things out, to wonder, to doubt. Sometimes our faith is strengthened by doubt, when doubt is a sincere, deep questioning, combined with deep trust in our own right and ability to discern the truth. You know, I heard something very moving the other day on one of those political talk shows. I love it that some people are paid just to come on TV and espouse opinions, and they're well paid. I mean, that's a wonderful job, isn't it? But this one man had been out going around the country talking to prospective voters, and I was very touched by what he said of his encounter with people in a southwestern county in Pennsylvania. It's a very conservative county, always has voted historically Republican. But the people there were troubled. They weren't troubled by a difference in political views or about a difference in their political parties. No. These people were troubled by a lack of what they thought was common decency in our current election. They felt that a line had been crossed when someone, a couple who had deep faith in their Muslim religion, had lost a son who had fought for our country and had died in battle. And they were very troubled by someone using that and making fun of that person for political gain. It had nothing to do with their political griefs. It had to do with they were affronted by what they saw was not showing common decency and respect for others. That was much more important than listening to someone who had their political views. And that gave me heart in the innate goodness of others, and that the majority of people that we encounter are actually decent, good people. Russell and I were talking before the service, and we were talking about two people that both of us really love, and he was saying he had a wonderful lunch with them, and they talked for 2 hours. And you know, I think that's one of the most beautiful things we can do in our lives. And that's when we really see God, is when we connect with others in a joyful, meaningful way, and we acknowledge that connection. I think our ultimate safety is finding the goodness within others. You know, Charles Fillmore talked about praying, and he said that in our prayers, we must strive to meet God face to face. Go above the daily events. Seek a consciousness that's above time and space, and realize that you're getting that inner assurance that God is always there, always around us, even though sometimes we can't feel it. I have found that sometimes in my life, it's been hard to connect with Spirit. Most of us in our lives face times when our pain is so overwhelming that we feel entirely lost. It's suffering that sometimes forms kind of a seal around us, leaving us with no place to go, and no place where we can safely consider our distress. And we don't find a place to put our heart upon. We feel lost and lonely. But we have to join our inevitable sorrow in life with faith in interconnectedness. And I think we find God in our interconnectedness with each other. We can keep getting up in the morning and do the best we can, and know that even the smallest action of ours, if it's done with good intentions, can have consequences. We sometimes miss the presence of God. It's always around us. But it doesn't come always in the form that we have fixed in our mind. When our hope for relief from suffering is based only on getting what we want in the precise way we want it, we bind hope to fear rather than faith. It's necessary sometimes to go through despair on our spiritual path of learning and to endure that dark night of the soul in order to deepen our faith. Is it necessary to have to go through all that despair sometimes and suffering? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that sometimes unbearable suffering is going to be part of our path, because sometimes it's part of life itself that we experience in this physical realm. Sometimes pain serves a purpose, though. It burns away superficiality and gets us down to the bone marrow of what life is all about and what we're doing here. There's a time when we need to stand outside of our pain and wait. Over time, we may come to see it as a way into the deepest part of ourselves. And then we can go back into the world. Because pain has been our vehicle for new insights into who we are and how much we need to care for ourselves and for one another. You know, we never know when our actions have an impact on others. Sometimes, I know this is true of me, by force of habit, we disparage ourselves and consider our actions inadequate. It's something I've worked a long time on. You know, sometimes things don't work exactly the way we anticipated or in the time frame we wanted. And so we get a little discouraged. Unless we can guarantee the response that we want, we might even decide not to take any actions at all. But we can't have an attachment to achieving results, because that can lead to relentless expectations, or the burnout, or the feeling that we can never do enough. We can't possibly know the ultimate result of the things that we do. As T.S. Eliot once wrote, "For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business." Years ago, there was a retreat. It was a 2-week retreat, a study of classical Asian Buddhism tenets and mysticism. And afterwards, the people who participated decided to write up their results. And so the author worked with another person who attended, and they came forth with a book about the teachings of this course. And they thought they had done a good job, and they had expressed clearly what they had learned. But then they dismissed it. It got published, but they thought, well, it'll be read by a very limited audience, and it probably won't have much of an impact, but they felt good about the result. And some years later, this author was reading an interview with this Burmese woman. I'm sure you've heard of her. Her name is hard to pronounce. It's Aung San Suu Kyi. And she's been a Burmese spiritual leader. She probably wouldn't call herself a spiritual leader, but she is, because she was a leader of the pro-democracy movement in Burma. She had dedicated her life in protesting the brutal, and I mean brutal, military dictatorship. And in 1989, she was placed under house arrest. And her sons were 16 and 12 at the time. And somehow her husband got them out. And they lived in London. And she wouldn't see them or her husband for many years. And many times she didn't have any money for food, and her hair fell out from the stress. She was weakened and had to stay in bed sometimes. The military offered her opportunities to leave, but she knew that if she left, she'd never be allowed to come back, and that the people looked to her for inspiration, for her strength, because she was a symbol of hope to them. There was a short period when the military released her, just a short period, and she was able to talk, write about her experience, and discuss her spiritual life. And she said the spiritual dimension was so important because she had deeply held convictions and strength of mind. And she tried to keep her center, but sometimes she was discouraged. She tried to meditate in a disciplined way, but she sometimes floundered because of a lack of instruction. And she would sit on her bed and grit her teeth trying to practice. And then her husband was able to send her a book that changed everything. It was the book I spoke of earlier. It was called In This Very Life. And through it, she learned precisely how to meditate and how to hang on. And it became her main source of spiritual support during those intensely difficult years. It was during her period of confinement, by the way, that she won the Nobel Peace Prize. But when the people wrote this little book, they just thought it would have limited distribution and limited impact. But imagine the impact they had on this spiritual leader whose own life has been some inspiration to others. You know, our lives can't be predicted in a linear way. I thought that, he felt that. It's a lot more outrageous and really a lot more mysterious. You know, there was a research project in Korea where a group of pregnant women were trying to get pregnant. And so there was a group who were going to pray for them, and then a group who would not pray for them. And you know, the group who were prayed for became pregnant at twice the rate of the unprayed for. Well, the researcher said, we can't publish that. No one will believe it. Those rates are, but they were significant. They were scientifically significant. So I think we have to keep offering prayers of loving kindness for the well-being and happiness of all who live. Not just for the people who are suffering under brutal regimes, but also for the people who are being brutal because they are separated from God. Sometimes we don't know what to do for someone, and what we do seems to be of little consequence. But we can have faith that we are not isolated individuals in a fragmented world. We are interconnected, whether we realize it or not. What others have done before us has an impact on the reality that we are experiencing right now. And what any of us might do has an effect over the reaches of time and space. And even when we feel helpless, we can find support in that truth. We can, with love and compassion, offer our hearts beyond the hurdle of pain, stirred by our faith, to act the best we can in our life together. We may not comprehend why there is so much suffering in the world, and why some people behave so badly toward others. But we can count on the fact that hatred does not cease because of more hatred. It only ceases because of love, and the power of love to overcome all hatred. We can't predict how our actions will turn out, but we have to know that whatever we do or say has impact and consequences. There's no guarantee about what any of us will be experiencing tomorrow or in the future, or what lies on the horizon. We don't know. But no matter what happens, the lives we live every day are part of a greater whole, and that greater whole is God. I read a column yesterday in the Washington Post. Maybe some of you read it too. And this man, who was a professor and actually a research on world disasters, was in his doctor's office and was stunned to learn from the oncologist that he had stage 4 colon cancer and that had spread to his pelvis. And the doctor asked what he did for a living, and he said he was a professor and researched disasters around the world. And oncologist looked at him and said, well, shows, I think you have a research project right now in your own life of disaster. So he went through the next year of grueling treatments. And one time a colleague of his stopped by the house to pray with him. And he said to the colleague, I don't like to be the kind of person who needs help. And the colleague looked at him and said, oh, Jamie, we don't like to admit it to ourselves, But we all are the type of people who need help. And in this journey that he took, he prayed for his healing. And one night he was taking the garbage out and he prayed for healing. And then all of a sudden, he got down on his knees outside in his backyard. The stars were above. And he let go. And he said, whatever will be, will be. And I accepted God. But take care of my wife and child. And at that moment, he knew total surrender. And he knew that even in the most painful moment, he could find God, and that God can redeem him. That God could redeem his pain, no matter how deep his emotional scars at that time were. He had worked with disasters all over the world. And he knew that people responded differently. Some people responded with, how could this happen to me? And I can't get over this, and I've lost everything. And some people responded with resilience, even though they had gone through identical experiences. And one man had lost his house, and a disaster worker was helping him. And this was in Sandy Hook. And his house had been blown away by the strength of the gales and the winds, but there was still a foundation. And the disaster worker was prepared to give him comfort, but the man said, well, sometimes you have to lose the roof to see the stars. And that's true of us too. Sometimes we have to lose the roof to see the stars. And may we always know that there are stars. And there will always be stars to guide us. And the truth is, we always have God around us, even though we don't always know it.